Prince Ikim Kolkor of Yyth. A thief's mercy. The sun lay low over the west wall of Greenwall, turning the stone to fire. Evening brought the markets to a slow simmer, merchants rolling down, awnings, hawkers counting coins, dogs nosing at scraps between stalls. It was the hour Ikim liked best, when the courtly eyes were turned inward towards supper halls and he could walk the streets without being announced by herald or trailed by the principality's guard. He wore no circlet, no crest, only a half-buttoned jerkin of green silk, boots a shade too fine for the dust, and a smile that drew every passing girl to glance twice. Arthur Greenpool walked at his side, brown-haired and careful-eyed, hands folded behind his back like a clerk still serving even when he ought to be at ease. "You know," Arthur said, lowering his voice, "Yondell expects my notes on the tax registers before dusk. And here you are, walking with me," Ikim answered, grinning. "What does that say of your priorities, Arthur? That I am a fool?" Ikim laughed, tipping his head toward the stalls. "No, that you are loyal. Come. One drink before you vanish back into ledgers. Wine tastes better when stolen from the hour meant for duty." Arthur sighed, but followed, as always. The two of them wove through spice sellers and cloth vendors, Ikim trailing his fingers across bolts of bright-dyed linen, tossing compliments that made old women blush. The prince's eyes never settled long. He had the restless gaze of a boy who thought the world was theatre, and he its star. It was near the roasted chestnut stand that he felt it, the faint tug at his hip. Ikim turned with the quickness of a cat. A thin boy of perhaps 12 froze before him, one dirty hand clutching his belt strap, the other clutching the half-loosened purse. Brown eyes wide, lips trembling, ribs showing beneath a torn tunic. The boy smelled of smoke and tallow, like someone who slept too near a tavern's kitchen. Arthur stiffened. "Thief." The boy tried to twist away, but Ikim's hand caught his wrist. Not rough, almost playful, like a dance grip, but firm enough that the purse clinked and stayed. "Well, well," Ikim said, smiling down. "A sparrow brave enough to pluck from a hawk." The boy swallowed hard. Don't waste words lying," Arthur snapped. "We should call the watch." At once, the boy's eyes filled with panic. He shook his head fiercely, lips soundless. Ikim tilted his head. The market noise carried on around them. Women haggling for onions, men shouting about horse feed, children weaving through stalls. But to Ikim it felt suddenly hushed, as though this ragged boy and his trembling hand were the only reality. "The watch," Arthur repeated, "sharper now. They'll know how to handle him. It isn't your place to show mercy." Ikim laughed, not cruelly, but with a lightness that brushed aside the tension. "Not my place? I am Prince Ikim of Yyth. Every place is my place, if I choose it." Arthur flushed. "That's not what I meant." But Ikim wasn't listening. He crouched until his eyes met the boy's. Close, he could see the freckles under the dirt, the split lip that had healed poorly. "What's your name?" The boy stared, mute. "Ah. No matter." Ikim slid his free hand into his own purse, drew out a single silver coin, and pressed it against the boy's palm. "There, take it. If you're clever enough to try stealing from me, you're clever enough to do something better with that coin. Gamble with it. Buy food. Bribe a drunk. Anything." Arthur sputtered. "Ikim." The boy's breath caught. His eyes darted from the coin to Ikim's face, searching for the trick. "No trick," Ikim said softly. "But if you mean to keep stealing, aim higher than silk-shirted princes. We're too easy." With that, he let go of the boy's wrist. The lad bolted, feet slapping the dust, vanishing between barrels and baskets as though the earth itself had swallowed him. Arthur gaped. "You've done nothing but encourage him. He'll steal again tomorrow, and worse." Ikim dusted his hands, rising to full height. "Then tomorrow he'll steal better. At least tonight he'll eat." Arthur shook his head, exasperated. "You think everything is jest." That was a chance to teach consequence. Ikim turned his smile on his friend, but it was gentler now, touched with something almost serious. Perhaps. Or perhaps consequence teaches itself soon enough. Why should I lend it the weight of my name, when the world will crush him without me? They walked on, though Arthur grumbled half the way back toward the citadel of Greenwall. Ikim listened only with one ear, his mind wandering. He remembered himself at 12, wrestling with Sir John in the yard, slipping from grips with laughter rather than learning form. He remembered the sting of his brother Shardel's words, always precise, always correct, always heavy with father's approval. The boy's eyes had not been calculating like Shardel's. They had been wide, terrified, hungry. Ikim wondered, in a faint whisper of thought, if he had just saved the boy, or ruined him further. But the whisper passed. By the time they reached the citadel, he was whistling again, teasing Arthur about his dour brow. Later that night. The matter might have ended there, had fate not chosen to remind him. Ikim had slipped into a tavern near Greenwall's south quarter, dressed, more plainly now, and was laughing over dice with 2 squires. A shout went up near the door, angry, then pained. Ikim turned, and saw a man staggering, clutching his ribs, while a small shadow darted out into the night. The tavern keeper cursed. That wretch! He's taken the till! Ikim stood abruptly. Through the door he caught a glimpse of the runner, skinny legs, ragged tunic. The same boy. For a heartbeat, Ikim considered pursuit. He could catch the boy. He was stronger, faster, trained. He could drag him back, play the hero. Instead, he sat slowly, forcing a smile. Well, at least the lad's bold. You'll get your coin back from the watch in due time. The squires muttered about thieves. The tavern keeper cursed more. Ikim threw a handful of silver on the counter, more than the till was worth, and bought silence with a flourish. But when he lifted his cup again, his hand trembled faintly. Arthur's rebuke. Days later, Arthur found out, as he always did. You saw him again, didn't you? He demanded in the garden, voice tight. The same boy. The one you let go. Ikim twirled a rose between his fingers, careless. Perhaps. And he robbed a tavern. A tavern deserved robbing more than I did. Arthur's patience cracked. This is no game. You fancy yourself merciful, but you're blind. You gave him coin, you gave him courage, and now he's emboldened. When he's caught, he'll hang. Do you call that mercy? Ikim leaned against the marble rail, looking out across the tiled rooftops of Greenwall. For once, his smile faltered. Better to live bold and hang, than to starve silent. Arthur's eyes narrowed. You say that because you have never starved. Ikim met his gaze, unflinching but softer now. And perhaps I never will. That is my curse, Arthur. I cannot starve, I cannot be hunted, I cannot be crushed the way others are. So if I lend a spark of daring to one who has nothing, who am I to withhold it? Arthur shook his head in weary defeat. You call it daring. I call it ruin. The shape of the lesson. Ikim never saw the boy again. Perhaps he fled Greenwall, coin in pocket. Perhaps he was caught and whipped, or worse. The memory lingered though. Ikim told the story often, reshaping it for his audience. At feasts he made it a comedy, the prince outwitted by a boy with nimble fingers. In taverns he made it a boast, how he'd given a thief a chance to rise. Only in quiet moments, with wine gone flat in his cup, did he wonder if Arthur had been right. But those were moments quickly drowned in laughter. Shadow of Shardel. The council hall of Greenwall's citadel smelled of wax, oak, and sweat. Sunlight spilled through the tall arched windows, catching the dust motes in golden streams. The room was long and narrow, lined with polished wooden tables, each occupied by scribes, aides, and minor lords of the principality, their faces taut with the seriousness of governance. At the head, King Kolkor sat, robes rich with the embroidery of the principality's crest, his expression measured as always. Ikim, Prince of Yyth, and second son of the king, lounged in a chair too, small for his long legs, his boots crossed on the carved rail before him. Beside him, Arthur Greenpool, assistant to Vizier Yondell, jotted notes diligently. Brow furrowed, hands moving in careful, precise loops across the page. Trade roads to the north are faltering, Shardel said, the older brother of Ikim, voice smooth and commanding. Bandits take advantage of late patrols, merchants delay shipments. If we fail to secure passage, the northern revenues will drop by nearly 15% this quarter. I propose a staggered patrol schedule, with reinforcements rotating every third day, and a system of watchtowers linked by signal fires for rapid communication. The room went silent. Even the scribes paused in mid-scroll. Shardel's words had the weight of inevitability, and every eye followed him as if he were a magnet, pulling their attention from all else. Ikim watched with faint impatience, his chin resting in the palm of his hand. He had heard all this before, countless times in smaller meetings, in the riding halls, during lessons he paid attention to only half-heartedly. Yet, he could not help but admire the effect Shardel had, the way the room bent slightly toward him, the unspoken certainty that the older brother would win every argument, every debate, every subtle contest of will. Arthur leaned close. Ikim, perhaps you should speak, offer some perspective. Ikim's eyes flicked to him. Perspective, Arthur? The man has already convinced everyone before I open my mouth. What need is there? Arthur's pen hovered over the parchment, poised, because you are here. If not to oppose, at least to demonstrate presence. To be heard. Ikim smirked. Presence was easy. To be heard was another matter entirely. He had tried it before, mimicking Shardel's style, attempting the authority of logic and strategy, only to be overshadowed, his words dismissed as noise. Yet the temptation to play still called to him. He leaned back, letting his chair creak, and raised a hand. A thought, he said, voice casual, just above the murmur of the scribes. Might the bandits not also respond to incentive rather than threat? Perhaps a few of the merchants could offer rewards for the capture of the ringleaders. Gold perhaps, or freedom from tariffs? Encourage them to police the roads themselves. A few heads turned, murmuring softly. Ikim smiled. A spark. Something of his own making, however half-formed. Shardel's eyes, calm and unblinking, met his. An interesting notion, Shardel said smoothly, but the merchants cannot be relied upon to act uniformly. Some will cooperate. Others will exploit the system, creating further chaos. Incentives alone lack enforcement. Without structured patrols, watchtowers and oversight, we risk not only banditry, but internal strife among the merchant guilds. Ikim suppressed a groan. Yes, of course. He had known deep down that his idea was too fanciful. Yet the moment of attention, however brief, was intoxicating. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper aimed at Arthur. Did you see? They're listening. For one heartbeat, they were mine. Arthur's lips twitched. One heartbeat. That is a generous estimate. Ikim ignored him. He had more work to do. He gestured vaguely to a carved table where maps of the northern roads were spread. Or, he said, louder now, voice ringing, we could simply station riders at each village, have them report daily. Combine it with the merchant incentives. A full tapestry of protection, less risk of empty promises. A murmur went through the room. Some scribes leaned forward. Some minor lords whispered to one another. Ikim let his eyes sweep across them, smiling faintly at the attention he was drawing. Shardel did not flinch, not even a flicker. Then we would multiply patrols unnecessarily, straining the garrison, and offer incentives, at the cost of treasury funds that might otherwise be used to fortify the southern borders. I fear your plan, brother, would create a network of confusion rather than protection. Ikim's shoulders slumped, and yet, there was a twist to this. A moment of satisfaction. Even in defeat, he had made the room turn to him, even if just for a breath. He leaned back, resting his head on one hand, letting the light from the windows glaze over him. Arthur sighed. Your brother is relentless. You must choose your battles carefully, Ikim. I choose them all, Ikim replied, voice soft, almost teasing. But not every battle is meant to be won. Arthur frowned. Carelessness will be your undoing. You speak like a jester in a hall of kings. Ikim laughed softly. Then let me be a jester who speaks truths they do not wish to hear. At least the laughter buys me time. The council continued, but Ikim's mind wandered. He watched Shardel, noting the subtle gestures, the careful inflection in his voice, the way he nodded slightly to particular scribes, coaxing agreement before speaking again. He had tried to imitate this once, standing before Sir John's training yard, repeating orders with authority. The men had stared, unsure whether to follow or laugh. Ikim had laughed, the men had laughed. The lesson had been learned poorly. Now, he sat in the shadow of mastery, fully aware of his own shortcomings, and yet unwilling to trade his freedom for competence. The thought pricked him, faint and unwelcome, that perhaps Shardel's victories were inevitable, and his own attempts would always be second best. Yet the room had turned to him, even if briefly. That alone was a kind of triumph. A spark of vanity flickered. He imagined telling this story at the taverns later, embellishing it, casting himself as the clever prince whose wit momentarily rivaled the cold brilliance of his brother. Arthur coughed, drawing him back. Ikim, there's a difference between charm and effectiveness. Do not confuse the two. Ikim waved a hand, as if dismissing the lesson. Effectiveness is dull. Charm endures. Arthur gave him a look of exasperation and muttered, "Someday, perhaps. You will learn that charm cannot pay taxes or repel bandits." Ikim smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but it can win hearts. And for a prince, hearts are more useful than coin, if wielded wisely." Arthur's eyes darkened, or more dangerous if wielded carelessly. The council ended with Shardel's plan approved. Ikim allowed a low whistle to escape, not in criticism but in mock admiration. He trailed behind the departing nobles, watching as his brother moved like a shadow across the marble floor, leaving a trail of quiet obedience. Ikim felt that familiar tug, envy tempered by indulgence, pride tempered by mischief. Later, in the gardens of the citadel, Ikim and Arthur walked among trimmed hedges and fountains, the sun now a pale disk over Greenwall's rooftops. "You've tried to speak, Ikim," Arthur said finally. "But you are always half a step behind, or deliberately beside the point. What are you trying to learn?" Ikim plucked a leaf, twirling it in his fingers. "To play, to dance, to see which way the wind turns before I leap." Arthur shook his head. "And the consequences?" Ikim shrugged. "Some lessons are better half learned. If I fall, I'll rise laughing." Arthur's expression softened only slightly. "Laughing may not be enough when the principality depends on you someday." Ikim paused, gazing at his reflection in the fountain's still water. For a brief instant, he glimpsed himself not as the indulgent second son, but as a prince who could command. Then the reflection rippled, and he saw only laughter, mischief, and freedom. He shrugged again, tossing the leaf onto the water. "Let them wait. The world has time." And with that, he bounded lightly along the garden paths, laughing, trailing Arthur behind, knowing the shadow of Shardel would always stretch longer than his own. Yet in every jest, every careless smile, he left a spark of himself, undaunted, unbroken, and very much alive. Glimpse of the warrior. Ikim adjusted the strap of his spear, laughing softly as the wind ruffled his dark hair. Beside him, Arthur Greenpool, ever cautious, tightened his gloves and checked the quiver of arrows he carried. "Careful, Ikim," Arthur said, voice low. "These hunts are not meant for foolishness. Remember Sir John's lessons. Control, discipline." Ikim waved him off, with a lazy hand. "Control and discipline are for those afraid of life, Arthur. Today, we hunt, and I intend to feel it in my veins, not in my ledger." Arthur shook his head, muttering about reckless princes, but he knew better than to argue. Ikim's eyes gleamed with a light that would not be tamed by warning or wisdom. Shardel was also present, mounted on a sleek black steed, surveying the forest edge with a calculating gaze. He was quiet, cool, and measured, the image of the heir apparent in every gesture. Ikim caught a flicker of envy, but quickly transformed it into amusement. There was a time for envy, yes, But now was a time for action. The hunt began in earnest. Horns sounded, echoing across the hills, and the riders spurred forward. The scent of game was sharp in the mist. Deer moved cautiously among the trees, their eyes bright and alert. Ikim leaned forward in his saddle, spear at the ready, his heart hammering with anticipation. For the first hour, the hunt was controlled, predictable. The party followed Shardell's lead, riding in a disciplined formation, arrows ready, spears steady. Ikim's hands itched. He longed to break formation, to act boldly, to carve his own name into the story of the day. And then, without warning, the boar came. It erupted from the underbrush, massive and bristling, tusks gleaming with dew and the faint red stain of previous kills. It charged straight at the party, snorting and thrashing, ears flat, eyes wild with fury. The riders scattered, some throwing themselves aside, others drawing arrows. Shardell froze, calculating angles, timing and trajectory, his mind already running through contingencies, probabilities, and the safety of his men. Ikim did not pause. Without thought, without hesitation, he spurred his horse forward, spear leveled, muscles coiled. The world narrowed to the thrashing beast before him, the blur of its tusks, the snort of its fury. His training with Sir John came to the forefront, not in measured commands but in instinctive motion, honed through countless drills and hours of sparring. The boar lowered its head, tusks swinging. Ikim's horse dodged slightly, and he adjusted, shifting his weight, aiming true. The spear struck just behind the beast's shoulder. It roared in pain but did not fall, charging again. Ikim held firm, bracing his legs, leaning into the strike, and once more, the spear found its mark, embedding itself deep into the boar's flank. The creature staggered, twisted, and finally fell, thrashing, defeated. A hush fell over the clearing. Riders stared, jaws slack. Shardell's calculating eyes flicked over to Ikim, and for a single heartbeat, there was nothing but the raw, undeniable force of courage in the younger prince. Sir John, who had been observing from the rear, stepped forward, nodding in approval. "That is the prince I tried to teach," he said, voice low but filled with gravitas. Ikim felt a surge of triumph, adrenaline and pride flooding his veins. For a moment, he was not the indulgent second son, the prankster at feasts, or the boy forever in Shardell's shadow. For that single heartbeat, he was a warrior, a hero, the master of his own fate. Arthur finally spoke, his voice tinged with awe. "By the gods, Ikim, that was..." Ikim laughed, cutting him off. "Brave, yes, bold, undeniably clever." Arthur shook his head, a mixture of exasperation and relief on his face. "Foolhardy, irresponsible, lucky. Don't let this inflate your head." Ikim waved him off. Luck, skill, courage, they were all the same in the telling of the story. And in that moment, none of it mattered. The party returned to Greenwall, boar in tow, riders discussing tactics, injuries and plans for the evening feast. Ikim recounted the battle repeatedly, embellishing details with every telling. The boar, in his version, was taller than the northern watchtower, fiercer than a dozen ogres, and twice as cunning as any man alive. The guards at the gates laughed, the squires marveled, and Arthur sighed, scribbling corrections he knew would be ignored. Even Shardell allowed a faint smile, though his eyes remained cool, appraising. "You were reckless," he said quietly as they dismounted. "And yet, you did not fail." Ikim grinned, leaning against his horse. "Reckless, yes. But alive. That is all a prince truly needs to be remembered." Arthur shook his head. "Alive, yes. But you risked far more than memory." Ikim's grin widened. "Ah. But memory is the currency of legends, Arthur. One day someone will tell the tale, and they will say, 'Ikim, second son of Yyth, faced the boar without fear and triumphed.'" Arthur groaned. "I hope they also note your recklessness." Ikim only laughed, walking toward the citadel gates, spear in hand, sunlight glinting on the blade. There was a freedom in this recklessness, a power in living fully, even if only for a moment. Shardell's shadow loomed long, but it could not reach the heart that beat fast with thrill. That evening, at the banquet hall, Ikim recounted the hunt once more, exaggerating with every flourish. The courtiers clutched their goblets, some in laughter, some in awe. He painted himself as fearless, the boar as monstrous, Shardel as the silent witness to his glory. Arthur listened quietly, pen in hand, adding notes for the vizier that would later temper the story with truth. Ikim noticed, but did not care. Let the legend grow, let the tale spread. The world, after all, was made for those who dared to step beyond the shadow of safety. Later, in the quiet of his chambers, Ikim removed his boots and sat by the window, looking out over Greenwall's rooftops. The moon had risen, silvering the tiled paths and spires, and the city slept in soft waves of quiet. He thought of the boar, of the thrill of the hunt, of the gaze of Sir John and the cool assessment of Shardel. For a fleeting moment, he felt the weight of responsibility, the crown that would one day be borne by his brother. The principality that depended on order and discipline, the expectations that pressed invisibly against him. Then, he laughed softly, letting it roll through the empty chamber. Responsibility could wait. Adventure could not. Arthur, who had stayed behind to finish his notes, looked up from the desk. You cannot live every day on the edge of recklessness, Ikim. Sooner or later, it will catch up to you. Ikim tossed a coin across the desk, letting it spin and settle. Perhaps, Arthur. But until that day comes, I will chase the thrill, taste the freedom, and carve my story into the world, however brief or fleeting it may be. Arthur could only shake his head, returning to his writing. Ikim stared out the window, the city lights like fireflies below, thinking of the hunt, the boar, the adrenaline, and the unshakable joy of having faced something fierce, and won. Even as the shadow of Shardel stretched long and cold, Ikim felt the spark of himself blazing bright. For a prince, for a second son, for a young man of Yyth, it was enough. Courtship. Ikim, second son of the principality, prepared to make his latest conquest. Lady Relaine of House Verda, known for her beauty, wit and sharp tongue. Ikim adjusted the fine silk scarf around his neck, checking his reflection in the polished surface of a bronze basin. Arthur Greenpool, ever the dutiful friend and scribe, stood to the side, holding a small notebook, in which he had painstakingly noted the correct etiquette, social points, and conversational hooks. Remember, Arthur said quietly, leaning close. She is clever, well-read, and will see through flattery easily. You must banish caution, my dear Arthur, Ikim interrupted, flashing a grin. Charm is the only sword I wield today. Let us see how she dances with it. Arthur's sigh was audible. This will not end well. Ikim ignored him, striding forward with that effortless swagger that seemed to draw attention without effort. Courtiers and servants alike turned as he passed, some with admiration, some with the obligatory awe owed to a prince. Ikim's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with delight, the thrill of attention, the anticipation of the challenge, the promise of conquest. Lady Relaine stood near the central fountain, her gown the soft green of new leaves, her hair glinting like spun gold. She laughed lightly at a remark from one of her companions, tossing her head in a gesture that made Ikim's heart beat faster. He approached, bowing with exaggerated flourish. Lady Relaine, he said, voice smooth, practiced. It is a rare pleasure to see the gardens lit not by sun alone, but by your radiance as well. The lady arched a brow, lips curling into a faint smile. Prince Ikim, she replied, with a tone that suggested amusement more than flattery. You flatter too easily. I hope your words are more honest than your compliments. Ikim's grin widened. Honesty is the first casualty of admiration, my lady. Yet I promise, my intent is pure, entirely devoted to the art of pleasing you. Arthur winced. Intentions, Ikim. Remember intentions. She can detect pretense. Speak truth where flattery fails. Ikim waved him off subtly, confident that the performance was flawless. He presented a small bouquet of violet blossoms, plucked from the palace gardens earlier in the day. For you, he said, kneeling ever so slightly, as a token of esteem and admiration. Lady Relane's eyes flickered toward the flowers, then back at him. A faint laugh escaped her lips. How charming. And the verses, pray tell, to accompany these. Ikim cleared his throat, reciting in his most romantic tone. The violet bends to you, my lady, yet none can sway my heart as you do. He finished with a flourish, expecting applause, a smile, or at least a faint blush. Instead, Lady Relane's smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed slightly, sharp and knowing. Ah, she said, her voice like silk laced with steel. I recognize these words. They are not your own, Prince Ikim. I heard them from a traveling troubadour last week, sung beneath the boughs of the northern willow glade. Ikim froze, the bouquet tilting slightly in his hand. A faint pink touched his cheeks, not from embarrassment entirely, but from the thrill of being caught in a misstep. Arthur's notebook seemed suddenly heavy in his hands, a weight of silent reproach. My lady, Ikim said, recovering with a laugh that attempted ease, I suppose the words spoke for me better than I ever could. Lady Relane's companions whispered softly, and she shook her head, the faintest smile returning, though it was laced with a pointed sharpness. The truth, Prince, is far more compelling than borrowed verse. Do you often attempt to charm with stolen words? Ikim forced another smile, bowing deeply. Perhaps more often than I ought, my lady. But one learns best through experience, does one not? Lady Relane arched her brow, stepping back with deliberate grace. Indeed. Experience, yes. And yet some lessons are costly, especially when the heart, or the pride, is involved. Ikim's chest tightened slightly, but he refused to show defeat. Then, let this be a lesson well learned, he said, voice bright, and I shall endeavor to craft words worthy of your own wit next time. She laughed lightly, more to dismiss him than encourage. Do try, Prince Ikim, or at least refrain from further humiliation. Arthur's hand twitched near his notebook, ready to jot the social disaster down for future lectures. See? He muttered quietly. Lessons half learned already. Ikim ignored him, allowing a playful smirk to mask the sting of embarrassment. Humiliation, my dear Arthur, is only the seasoning of courtship. Without it, the feast is bland indeed. The party moved on to the gallery where lanterns glowed softly, reflecting the polished stone floor. Ikim walked beside Lady Relane, careful not to match her stride exactly, letting her take the lead in the dance of conversation. He attempted to recover with subtlety, praising her knowledge of the northern herbs, commenting lightly on the elegance of her embroidery, all while weaving in gentle humor. Yet, no matter how carefully he spoke, a shadow of doubt lingered over him. He had learned one lesson: wit and charm could open doors, but deception, even minor, could close them faster than any rival suitor. And Lady Relane was not so easily swayed. By the time the evening feast began, Ikim was forced into a dance of performance and improvisation. He laughed, jested, and bowed as appropriate, each gesture measured to appear effortless. Though Arthur could see the tension behind the carefully crafted smile. He was learning, slowly, that charm without truth could crumble in an instant. Ikim and Arthur walked through the palace corridors, now quiet and mostly empty. The lessons of the evening lingered, mingling with the scent of roasting meats, lavender, and polished stone. You see, Ikim, Arthur said softly, words, when borrowed, carry the mark of their true owner. No matter how finely you dress them, the truth will find its way. Ikim sighed, leaning against the cool marble wall. Yes, yes. Lesson received. But you forget the thrill, Arthur. The attempt itself, the chase, the moment of possibility, is worth the occasional scorn. Arthur shook his head. Occasional? Tonight, my prince. The scorn was abundant. Ikim grinned faintly, brushing a hand over his hair. Then let it be a reminder that I must sharpen both wit and words. And when I fail, let it at least be memorable. Arthur's lips twitched in reluctant amusement. Memorable indeed. That you are. For better or worse. Ikim laughed, tossing his head back. Better, Arthur. Always better. And next time, Lady Relane shall not catch me unprepared. I shall craft verses that even the troubadours will envy. Arthur sighed. And yet I fear she may remain unimpressed. Some lessons are learned only after repeated missteps. Ikim grinned, eyes sparkling in the torchlight. Then we shall misstep, my friend, but with flair. And with that, he left Arthur behind to record the evening's social calamity, striding down the quiet halls of Greenwall with the same confidence he carried into the morning hunts and council debates. The night belonged to him, to charm, to folly, to the half-learned lessons that shaped him as the devil-may-care second son of the Principality of Yyth. Even in embarrassment, Ikim felt alive. And alive in his reckoning was more valuable than perfect execution, precise wit, or any borrowed verse. Friend in shadows. The lanterns cast pools of golden light on the cobblestones, and the occasional guard passed with a measured pace, armor glinting faintly in the torchlight. Most citizens had retired to their homes or taverns, leaving the city to the night and the shadows that crept along its alleys. Ikim moved through those shadows as if he owned them, cloak pulled loosely over his shoulders, hood down so his dark hair caught the torchlight. Arthur Greenpool followed, careful to remain near the wall, notebook tucked under his arm, eyes darting to every flicker of movement. You always lead us into the darkest streets, Arthur muttered, voice low. Do you forget that thieves, worse than our morning market pickpockets, roam these alleys? Ikim grinned, tossing a glance over his shoulder. Thieves, shadows, dragons, let them come. Adventure, Arthur, is in the corners where caution fears to tread. Arthur groaned. And mischief, yes. You live for mischief, Ikim. That is clear. Ikim laughed softly, the sound echoing against the stone walls. Caution is the luxury of the dull, my friend. I prefer a life with heartbeats and risk. Besides, he added, voice dropping conspiratorially, tonight, we have a purpose beyond mere wandering. Arthur's brow furrowed. Purpose? Do tell, before we stumble into trouble, again. Ikim's grin widened. A friend in need. The alley narrowed, twisting like a serpent, shadows pooling thickly at its edges. Ahead, a flicker of movement caught Ikim's eye. He slowed, crouching slightly, and Arthur followed instinctively. See? Ikim whispered. A stray cat, a thief. Or perhaps, our friend awaits. Arthur's hand rested on the hilt of the dagger at his belt, caution etched into every line of his face. Ikim, if it's a thief, I swear. Then, we shall teach him a lesson, Ikim interrupted, voice low, eyes alight. And perhaps learn one ourselves. From the darkness emerged a figure, small and hunched, but familiar. A boy, no older than 12, hair tangled and eyes wide, stepped forward. Ikim's pulse quickened. He recognized the boy immediately, the same street urchin he had spared months ago, the one Arthur had warned him about endlessly. You, Ikim said, voice both soft and teasing. You have grown bold since last we met. The boy glanced nervously at Arthur, then back at Ikim. He clutched a small stolen bag to his chest, as if it were a shield. Do not speak falsely, Ikim said gently. I will know if you lie. Arthur tensed. Ikim, remember what I said, he may be desperate. You can't always save them from themselves. Ikim's eyes softened, though his grin never left. But sometimes we must try, yes? Come, show me what troubles you, little thief. The boy led them deeper into the alleyways, moving quickly but cautiously. They passed abandoned stalls and empty carts, the smell of the city at night thick in the air. Finally, they arrived at a narrow courtyard, where a makeshift fire burned, weakly, and a small group of ragged children huddled around it. Ikim crouched beside the fire, ignoring the chill creeping into his bones. Well, he said quietly, voice full of warmth. You have quite the assembly here. Friends, yes? The boy nodded, eyes bright with fear and hope. They have nowhere else, he whispered. No food, no home. I thought maybe someone would help. Arthur's lips tightened. You did the right thing bringing us here, he said softly. But Ikim, you know the risks. Feeding them, sheltering them, there are laws. Guards patrol near here, especially at night. Ikim waved a dismissive hand. Then let us bend the law, Arthur, if only slightly. What harm in one night of charity? One spark of mercy? Before Arthur could protest further, a shadow moved near the courtyard's edge. Ikim stiffened, eyes narrowing. Who goes there? He called, voice steady, though every nerve hummed with anticipation. From the darkness emerged a figure clad in the familiar polished armor of the Principality's knights. Sir John, broad-shouldered, imposing, with a face that bore both sternness and years of experience, he stepped into the torchlight. Prince Ikim, Sir John said, voice low but authoritative. And Arthur Greenpool. What brings you to these alleys at this hour? Ikim rose, dusting off his cloak. Sir John. A pleasure. We discovered friends in need. Sir John's eyes swept the courtyard, noting the ragged children and the meager fire. His expression softened slightly, though the steel in his gaze remained. You risk much for mercy, Ikim. It is commendable, but foolish. These streets are dangerous, and not all men are as generous as you. Arthur nodded emphatically. Indeed, sir. We were merely... Ikim waved a hand, cutting him off. Merely trying to offer warmth, shelter, food. Nothing more. Sir John studied him for a long moment, then sheathed his sword. Your intentions are noble, but noble intentions alone will not protect these children. Come with me. I know a place where they may find safety and oversight. Ikim's eyes lit up. A safe haven? Truly. Sir John inclined his head. Yes, but we must move quickly. The longer you linger here, the greater the risk. Ikim and Arthur helped the children gather what meager belongings they could, and they followed Sir John through a maze of alleys, slipping past guards and patrols unnoticed. The boy who had led them held Ikim's hand tightly, eyes wide with awe and fear. You are brave, Ikim said softly, squeezing the boy's hand. Do not forget that. Bravery is often the first step toward freedom. The boy nodded, but said nothing. At last, they arrived at a small abandoned building on the edge of Greenwall, one that Sir John had arranged for the children through a discreet network of allies and guild members. It was modest, but warm fires burned within, and straw beds had been laid for the children. You are safe here, Sir John said, addressing the group. You will be fed, sheltered, and protected. But you must listen and follow instructions. The world outside is unforgiving. Ikim knelt beside the youngest child, a girl of perhaps 7, brushing a lock of hair from her dirt-streaked face. Do you understand? Safety is yours now, but courage and care must accompany it. Arthur scribbled notes, recording names, ages, and conditions, while Ikim helped arrange the children around the fire, telling stories, joking to coax laughter, even if only briefly. After the children were settled, Sir John spoke privately with Ikim and Arthur. You cannot save everyone, Prince, he said, but tonight you made a difference. Remember that intention alone does not suffice. Discipline, caution, planning, these are as vital as courage. Ikim nodded, though his expression remained light, teasing. Yes, yes. But mercy tastes sweeter when unplanned. Sir John's eyes narrowed slightly. Sweetness can blind you, Ikim. Be careful that you do not mistake recklessness for heroism. Ikim grinned. And yet, even the reckless learn lessons. Eventually. Arthur muttered under his breath. Half-learned lessons more like. As they left the building and made their way back through Greenwall's streets, Ikim's mind buzzed with thoughts and plans. The night had been fraught with danger, yet alive with purpose. He had helped those in need, felt the thrill of action, and basked in the quiet admiration of Sir John and the tentative respect of Arthur. Do you see now? Arthur said, voice soft, why caution matters. One misstep and the children could have been lost, or worse, captured by criminals or guards unaware of our intentions. Ikim waved a hand, eyes sparkling. Perhaps. But tonight, we triumphed. That is the memory I will carry. Sir John shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Memory is fragile. Action leaves consequences. Remember both, Prince Ikim. You may charm the world, but it will not bend forever to your will. Ikim chuckled. tossing a pebble into a puddle that shimmered with the reflection of lantern light. Then let me charm, let me misstep, and let me learn what I may. The world is wide, Sir John, and life too short to dwell only in caution. Sir John regarded him silently for a long moment, then nodded. Go then. But promise me you will not forget discipline, even in mischief. Ikim placed a hand on his chest, mock solemnity in his posture. I promise, Sir John. Or at least I shall try. Arthur shook his head exasperated, but said nothing. He knew better than to argue when Ikim's grin held that unyielding spark of reckless delight. The rest of the night passed quietly. Ikim wandered through the quiet streets, sometimes pausing to watch the lanterns flicker, sometimes laughing softly at imagined adventures. Sir John and Arthur walked beside him, silently accompanying the prince, who lived in the delicate balance of charm, indulgence, and mischief. Even in the shadows, Ikim's heart felt light. He had made a difference tonight. He had risked, he had laughed, and he had learned. A lesson, not fully perhaps, but enough to leave a spark for the future. For a second son in the Principality of Yyth, with a brother like Shardel looming long, the shadows were where he thrived. There he could act, learn, stumble, and occasionally triumph. And with Arthur at his side, and Sir John's guidance ever present, the night felt alive, dangerous, and entirely his own.